I was first introduced to the world of hardline progressivism in one of my college classes in freshman year. I was sitting in a giant lecture hall, listening to my peers scattered throughout the room as they gifted the class with all of their hard-earned freshman wisdom on how the world really works, and the thing that struck me the most was when someone in the back spoke up and said, "So many people are uncomfortable talking about race in this country because we think that racism is over, but that's just not true and we still need to have these conversations." The kicker is that the class was environmental science, of all places to be talking about race, and that's a whole other video's worth of thoughts right there. But that statement struck me because the moment those words came out of my classmate's mouth, I immediately thought, well, I'm not uncomfortable talking about race. Don't you think that's assuming a little much about how I feel? A long, long time has passed since that day early in my first semester of college, but not a thing has changed. I still stand by those thoughts. I'm not uncomfortable talking about race. I'm not uncomfortable when other people talk about race. I have no problem with giving my opinion on such a hot-button issue as race. And, in fact, I've concluded that to assert that everyone is uncomfortable talking about race reveals so much about the mindset of the person who puts forth that idea. Let me explain why. As we all know, race has become one of the most controversial topics in our public discourse in recent years. After the foundation of Black Lives Matter in 2012, it seemed like everyone on the left started to go on red alert about race, eager to jump at the first sign of anything that could be construed as even tangentially racist. What resulted was an ongoing 4 years of moral hysteria in which the left tried to dominate the narrative about race relations in this country, and now, in current year, everybody is absolutely terrified of being called racist. I think it might be a leftist's worst fear. Nothing is worse to the left than being called a bigot of any kind. But I'm on the left, and I'm not terrified of being called a racist. You know why? Because I'm not a racist. I know that I'm not a racist. I'm not using that as a pretext for some kind of questionable worldview. I'm not saying I'm not a racist, but I'm saying I'm not a racist. Full stop. I don't treat people differently because they have a different skin color than me. I don't question someone's qualifications for education or employment because of their ethnicity. I don't treat my black, Latino, and Asian friends any differently than my white friends because of their race. I don't see them as my black friends or as black people. They're just my friends. They're just people. And I respect them as people. I'm not afraid to challenge their worldview. I have no reservations calling them out on their bullshit. If I disagree with their opinions on, say, affirmative action, or Black Lives Matter, or the concept of white privilege, I will let them know. I don't condescend to them and act like their egos are so fragile that they'll go into an existential crisis if I disagree with them. I don't treat them as a protected class. The reason I'm not scared of being called a racist is because I'm not one, and if you're going to accuse me of racism without any basis to make that claim, then why should I care? Why should I dignify that with a response? You're just incorrect, and why should I care about something that holds about as much weight as kindergarten-level name-calling? I'm going to keep expressing my opinion, whether you like it or not. And yet, that person in my class would still tell me that I'm uncomfortable talking about race. Despite the fact that I do talk about race. Despite the fact that I show no signs of discomfort or anxiety when I talk about race. Despite the fact that I don't treat my friend's skin color as the most important and essential aspect of their personhood. Despite the fact that I'm not terrified of being called a racist. In fact, wouldn't it be more accurate to level that judgment against you, Mr. Progressive Leftist? Isn't it you that's worried about being called a racist? Isn't it you who walks on eggshells to avoid offending people of color? If you're so anxious when discussing these issues, doesn't that mean you're uncomfortable talking about race? And if you're so terrified of being perceived as racist, wouldn't it make sense for you to constantly talk about race and racism to make yourself appear very race-conscious and enlightened and not racist? And wouldn't it make sense for you to say that everyone who doesn't talk about race all the time is, in fact, uncomfortable talking about race, simply to distract from the fact that you're the only one who's uncomfortable? Those are levels of projection that would make Freud himself blush. And, as any student of Freud will tell you, this isn't a conscious effort. This is done to mitigate the staggering amount of anxiety and cognitive dissonance that results from the clash between your ideals and your instincts. You can't stand being disgusted by racists while at the same time still being uncomfortable talking about race. And the irony now, of course, is that by trying so desperately to appear not racist, you have become the very thing you were trying to avoid in the first place. By deliberately attempting to preserve the sensibilities of ethnic minorities, you have treated them as a protected class. You have treated them differently than you would a white person. You have condescended to them, told them that they shouldn't have to deal with criticism of any kind, told them that they can't handle it. And that is the definition of racism. So maybe the next time you want to tell everybody in the room that they're uncomfortable talking about race, try looking in a mirror.